All right, this is Ricky,
And this is Brendan.
and you're listening to A Gentleman's Disagreement.
What I wouldn't give for the hope I used to find in a case of lion's head. Folks of different minds, because even though it did not share the pains we share, that American ideal, friends made over arguments in an early morning buzz. Need an early morning buzz.
All right, Brendan, it is evening here, September the 25th. I made it back in time, but I had a little 5 hour drive back from Maine.
Barely. As I said, you've been driving up and down the East Coast this last.
I really have. I think I've put more miles in the car in the last 3 weeks than I have in probably the last 2 years. But I was just up in beautiful Rangeley, Maine. Have you ever been?
That does not. I've been to Maine, but Rangeley does not ring a bell.
Yeah, it's on the western side. I guess it's reasonably close to Sugarloaf. That was like what the
Okay.
result
Okay.
was
Okay.
advertising. I can't say that for certain because I didn't see any signs for Sugarloaf itself, but there were a lot of advertisements in there. But I did see some other signs on my on my drive up there, and they weren't they maybe were what you'd expect for, but maybe not. Any guesses?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I didn't set that up very well, but I thought it was very interesting that once I got off of 95 in Maine and I think I was on like Route 202 or 4, I saw probably 10 different signs for firearms and firewood. No
Two essentials,
no fireworks though, and I thought that was interesting because I figured
only New Hampshire.
okay, learn something new every day.
Certainly do, and hopefully we're going to learn a lot more today.
Yeah, well, with that, what do we got? What are we talking about this week?
We are tremendously fortunate to be joined by another wonderful guest. We're going to be joined in a minute by Carine Hajjar, who I'll give her a bigger bio when she comes on, but is a current writer for the Boston Globe, formerly of the Wall Street Journal and National Review, Harvard grad. And she is a young writer and reporter, but tremendous. She has reported tremendous amount in depth on immigration, and so we feel like she's in a unique position given her background and the history of like where she has reported to provide an important perspective to a conversation that you and I have been wanting to have for a little while now, given how immigration, while it seems like it's always an issue, seems to be even more of an issue in recent months.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have someone who's like actually talked to people and done both sort of talking to migrants, but also just like in both like along the border in Texas and then also in New York. So very excited to talk to her.
Yeah, so before we bring her on, just a quick reminder, everyone out there, the podcast is brought to you by the hardworking craftsmen over at Cannon Hill Woodworking. They've been building handcrafted, high-end custom tables and desks in Boston since 2018. That's Cannon with two N's. You can check them out on Instagram or visit them online at www.cannonhillwood.com. Ricky, in honor of the writers and the Hollywood studios reaching a tentative agreement to break their strike, I wanted to make sure that you were aware that the palm trees in Hollywood all have had illustrious acting careers.
You just searched wood puns in
Look,
wood.
I was so relevant too.
That was good. All right.
Oh, there we go. I appreciate it. All right, let's bring on Carine. We are now thrilled to welcome Carine Hajjar onto the program. Carine is an opinion writer and editorial writer at the Boston Globe. She previously completed the Fund for American Studies Joseph Rago Memorial Fellowship for Excellence in Journalism, quite the title, at the Wall Street Journal editorial board, where she edited op-eds and covered immigration, crime, and elections. Prior to that, she worked for the National Review, where she covered immigration at the southern border from Del Rio, Texas. So with everything happening with immigration these days, we felt like the Carine was uniquely situated, having covered this subject in Texas and in New York and now in Boston. So we're thrilled to welcome Carine to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
So just like big picture wise, for someone who's still early in that career, you've written extensively on immigration, like I said, in 3 different locations. But how did you get into covering this subject in general?
Well, it was always an area of interest just because my mom's an immigrant. She's from Venezuela. She came over to the US in the late 90s. So she's been here for a while, but I've seen a lot of her family go through the immigration process. But I never intended for it to be my main area of focus. It just so happened that I was kind of in the right place at the right time. When I was at National Review, I noticed that Title 42, which was a pandemic era limit on asylum at the southern border, wasn't really being covered broadly in the media, and I kind of got on that beat, and all of a sudden it blew up in 2022. So and 2021 as well. So that it was just, good timing. I also grew up speaking Spanish, so it allowed me to tell migrant stories as well, and I think that's really important when you're covering this issue.
Well, for better or for worse, immigration is a huge topic and something that's, like we said, has been very much in the news recently. But one of the things Ricky and I have talked about is that, like, it almost feels like every time we have a national election coming up, immigration's back in the news. So from your perspective, what, if anything, is unique about the current immigration crisis, as many people would call it now, as opposed to the immigration crisis we had 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I mean, yeah, this issue is always politicized no matter what. I think that this is the first time where all the hype is truly worth it. I mean, this is, at least in the last 5 years, these are some record-breaking numbers. This month there was a day, or this past month there was a day where encounters at the southern border reached near 10,000. They're averaging out around 8,000 a day, and that's truly a breaking point just in terms of operation down at the southern border. But I think the other main issue and factor in all of this political conversation is that people up north are seeing the impacts of immigration now. It's not just being absorbed by all of these border communities. It is really spreading far and wide. So it's something that people are coming into contact with more. You can see it in New York City, you can see it in Boston, and that didn't used to be the case.
Right. So you've written how we had Eric Adams in New York City declared a state of emergency, and then Maura Healey, governor up here in Massachusetts, just recently last month declared a state of emergency. That follows other states of emergencies in cities like Chicago. What pressure, if any, does that put on, like, the Biden administration now that it seems to be maybe hitting home more in these blue areas?
Well, certainly it puts a lot of optics on the issue, which the president is surely not happy about. Mayor Adams a few months ago was dropped off the re-election campaign. So I think that was kind of a sign that the Biden camp is not happy about how outspoken he's been. But actually, I think that these blue state leaders are feeling they're probably taking a victory lap right now because the Biden administration is granting TPS to all Venezuelan migrants. So that will just help expedite the work permit process, which might help alleviate pressures by allowing people to be able to make a living for themselves.
Yeah. So 2 things to that. One, the Venezuelan thing that just happened, I believe, like 3 or 4 days ago, and it seemed like President Biden was backtracking a little bit on what he said he was going to do, and Secretary Mayorkas had come out and said that, like, we still strongly discourage people. This is not to encourage people to come here illegally, but this will, like, potentially help alleviate some of the stresses that are being caused by, like, this migrant crisis. But you've written extensively, like, this intersection between labor issues and migrant issues. So can you just talk a little bit more about, like, how you see those issues intersecting and what, if anything, this Venezuelan move does to address those issues?
Well, right now, the central tension, especially when you're looking at blue cities and states, is that you have folks filling up the shelters that can't work. And it just so happens that in places in New York and places like Massachusetts, there's a really strong need for labor. So some people could look at this as good timing. sadly, the way that the law is structured, and this is something that I don't know why the Biden administration didn't take into account, but it's not like you can get here and snap your finger and get a work permit. And so the process kind of forces people either into the shadows or forces them to wait in shelters, probably living, in a way that they did not envision. So that's the crisis that you're seeing in cities right now. Certainly, I think that people who want to come work and contribute, as a lot of the families that I've come into contact with, that's what they say. They really are here to work and create a better life for their families. And I think that's commendable. The way that the system is structured right now doesn't accommodate that easily. So you have a lot of people waiting in legal limbo to be able to do that. And there's no clear path to it. And so the Biden administration's first mistake was allowing all these people to come in under certain legal standing that's not clear. It makes their legal status quite unclear going forward, which is just instability for them. And then also, granting blanket work permit claims, no matter what Mayorkas says about this doesn't mean the border's open. It does serve as a magnet. I think that the Biden administration needs to have a concrete plan on. Number one is always immigration reform, and that falls on Congress as well, but also a way to address the incentives that they're creating.
I think you bring up a lot of really interesting points. I guess maybe I'll try and take this in one direction at a time. How, in thinking about like sort of the special status for Venezuelan immigrants in this particular situation, but we've done this in the past with Cubans and a number of other groups, depending on sort of who we like and who we don't like abroad at the time. How does that sort of impact the dynamic of immigration, and sort of how does it then impact how this policy is either helping or hurting?
It's just a mix of help and hurt. You have like a lot of people here who are ready to work and contribute, and they're sitting in shelters, and a lot of them are ready to work. So there is immediate help in that this will help a Venezuelan population that has gone through authoritarian dictatorship for years, and crime and all that comes with that, be able to work and support their families. But I think that when we're thinking about immigration in the US, especially with such a broken system, you have to think really big picture about incentives and sustainability. And it's just not sustainable to keep telling people the border's closed, but we're going to grant, blanket work permits. We're going to blanket work permits to this group of people. And now the pressure is going to be on from activists, from migrants to extend these to different groups as well. So in a lot of ways, this is really breaking the system. And I think that the best thing for the Biden administration to do would be to sit down with people on the left and the right and say, how can we make the system work to bring the people in that we need, the people that want to contribute to this community, without using the legal loopholes that exist, that break the system in the way that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ricky and I were talking briefly before you came on, and I said, to me, this seems like a band-aid for a bullet hole. Like, this is like, oh, like we're going to temporarily, and this seems to be like what we've been doing collectively, Biden administration back through the Trump, Obama, Bush administrations, just like patch it here, patch it there, and there's no comprehensive reform. So kind of two questions on that. One, do you think the Biden administration is just going to have to own this, even though this is really Congress's problem?
He promised to own it. That was one of his main campaign promises. And I think he's done quite the opposite. So I do think in an ideal world, it would be great to see the president step up and, use some of that unity that he talked about at the inauguration, and try to bring together party leaders to sit down and think about comprehensive reform. But it's just not what we're seeing. And I think, in fact, the policy is just breaking things down to such a level that I think that there will be political ramifications over this for years to come. And it's really a shame, because, the US should have the best immigration system in the world, and should lead in that area. And we're a country of immigrants. And to see this issue become, just political football is really frustrating.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Having been able to go down to the southern border, and then also having sort of the benefit of being in New York City to sort of see what is happening, sort of boots on the ground kind of thing. What are some of the things that you think like are low hanging fruit that we should be doing immediately that we're not doing?
Well, I think that the first thing is that there needs to be securing of the border in to some degree, because what's happening right now is that folks are coming in and asking for asylum, and the Biden administration is largely letting most people who ask in, and what that's doing is pulling border patrol agents. There are two types of border patrol agents in this context. You think about the people at the ports of entry, and then the people out in the field. The people out in the field are no longer out in the field. So what that's doing is just pulling everyone towards the ports, towards processing duties, and it's allowing a lot of not great people to enter in between who are taking advantage of the situation. Cartels are really taking advantage of the situation. We hear a lot about the drug issues, but and the drugs pouring through the border, but I mean, there's been a spike in people on terrorist watch lists come through the border, and those are just the ones we know about. So I think that is an immediate issue. I think also just I don't know exactly what the answer to this would be because it's so complicated, but there's a lot of child trafficking and sex trafficking, and there should be more resources down there to really vet the people who are coming through and make sure that they're okay, and that they're not being whisked off into a terrible situation.
Yeah, I think those are all really serious issues with what's happening right now, and you're very much right to put them to like the front of this conversation. I think one of the things in reading your reporting on this that I found really refreshing was that in addition to addressing these really serious concerns, you also provide like the other side of the picture too of migrants who are here legally, whether from Venezuela or from Afghanistan or from Ukraine, who are still now are like, as you said, like are in this legal limbo, which is stressing the states like Massachusetts and New York and Illinois and so many others so much. So in addition to like pairing the securing the border, can you talk a little bit more about like what you would recommend or what Governor Healy or Mayor Adams is asking for in terms of the immigrants that are here legally? What more can we be doing so that taxpayers in these states are not paying for these people just to sit in shelters all day?
Right. I think that work permits is a big issue. The problem with granting TPS broadly is the, we've talked about the incentives, but also just the US government doesn't have the processing power right now to deal with kind of the legal loophole process that has been created by this administration. Some migrants are filing, multiple applications for multiple things, and it's super confusing. And talking to immigration experts and lawyers, they don't even get it sometimes. And there are so many pathways in now that it is impossible to understand. I think that leaders calling for work permits it's important in the short term. Certainly it will help alleviate some of the stress. And if you're here, you should work and you should contribute and be able to provide for your family. But it's a band-aid solution. And the real thing that they're afraid to say is that we need to secure the border. Actually, Adams made a comment alluding to that a week ago or a week or two ago. But I think that they're getting there because they're realizing that work permits are not going to stop people from coming there. And I don't know, with the number of people arriving to these different places, even if a certain group start getting work permits faster, you're still going to be having plenty of people who need help. And I think, it's commendable to see all hands on deck in these cities and states trying to accommodate these folks, but there is a limit and we're reaching that limit.
Yeah, speaking of that, can you talk a little bit about why places like Boston and New York and their right to shelter laws have made the crisis so much worse for these cities recently?
Well, I mean, people know that they can come here and get shelter and come to New York City and basically anyone gets shelter. If you're in Massachusetts, that's more families and pregnant women. But it just puts a strain on the administration when they reach these points of shelter being completely full and dwindling housing, and their hands are tied and need to keep fulfilling this? Are they pulling it out of thin air? It's becoming really difficult for these administrations, and especially in Massachusetts, which is having a housing crisis right now. It's really hard not only to find physical space and space that's safe, but also people to operate these places. And so you're seeing the Boston Globe we ran an editorial on this last week about how the Red Roof Inn in Sutton, it was 18 odd rooms were rented out, and migrants were sent there basically alone. The town had very little notice. They had to step up and accommodate these folks, but a fire broke out there. And so it seems like the state is scrambling so much that they can't do their due diligence on where people are going. And the National Guard only got there a few days after. So you're just seeing kind of the breakdown of the shelter that's being offered.
In your experience, how are many of these migrants, like first-time entrants in the United States, getting up here to Boston and New York? I know that, like, you know, if we follow the Times or whatever, you're hearing about the buses from Governor Abbott or the flights from DeSantis. But just in your experience, is that contributing at all, or is it just that they know that in the North there are sanctuary cities, so that's where they head?
That's certainly, I mean, those programs certainly exist. And I've seen some of those buses before, and I covered some of those buses that were arriving at the Port Authority last year. But you're also seeing federally funded buses and buses funded by FEMA money. And then there are a lot of NGOs at the border who are helping folks just get to where they want to go. And a lot of times, people are told New York will shelter you and will give you resources. So it would make sense that different organizations, people would send folks there if they have nowhere else to go. Somewhere like Boston is seeing a high influx of Haitian migrants, and there's a big Haitian population in Boston. So that's a lot of word of mouth drawing them to Boston. So really, people are arriving all types of ways. There were federally funded planes that were bringing people to New York last year.
So with that, I think a lot of people on the right kind of see the reaction of these politicians up north as like this kind of great irony or schadenfreude, like where you were pretty much like, hey, everyone's welcome here, and you lambasted President Trump and the Trump administration for his border policies, and it was all well and good until all of a sudden it's your cities and your states that are being overrun, and now it's a state of emergency, and everyone's looking around and saying, well, we can't have this continue. And this, I think Politico just came out this morning with an article about the Biden administration had floated a plan about maybe making some places in New Jersey like asylums or shelters because New York City is so overwhelmed with migrants right now, and everyone in New Jersey, Democrats, Republicans, we're like, hell no, like we're not in my state. This is where it becomes like, oh, well, it's really easy when Texas and Arizona and Nevada are the ones dealing with it, but it's now that it's up here, so I'm just like, the dynamics have shifted, it seems to me, within the last year. Have you kind of seen that too?
Certainly, and I think it just goes to show, these were groups of people that were really criticizing border towns and cities for asking for help, and I went down there, and these places are completely overwhelmed, and you have local PDs that don't have that much funding and don't have that many officers having to deal with different high-speed smuggler chases, having to do extra securing of local schools, doing overtime shifts. You have, this has been a reality for them forever. And again, this is not just a Biden issue. I mean, numbers were very high under Trump too, sure. But, it's just getting worse. And I think that, the limit is being reached in places where they never conceived of anything like this happening. And the right to shelter was a nice, happy thing we're going to do because we're, nice people, and that might all be true, but it's not practical policy, and we're seeing why that is now.
That's really well said. So I wonder, like, the other side of that coin, where now that you seem to have, while people might disagree on solutions, there seems to be at least a more united front across parties of like, this is a huge issue that needs to be addressed on a federal level. Whether, again, to keep coming back to these figures of Governor Healy or Mayor Adams are saying, like, the federal government is leaving these cities and states, hanging them out to dry, really. And as you said, like, the states are doing everything they can, but you just can't pull money out of nowhere forever. Do you sense that there would be is there any push right now on Congress to try to deal with this issue?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's always a push, but given how politicized things are, I don't really see that being realistic in the near future. I mean, who knows? But I think that really just things are going so poorly, and people are seeing the lack of action and urgency on behalf of the president, that a lot of the attention is there and a lot of the focus is there. And of course, it does fall on Congress to draft and pass reform, but I think people expected the president to step up as more of a leader in these efforts.
Yeah, and that seems fair based on the things that he had promised on the campaign trail and at the beginning of his administration. That seems fair that, as you said, that he said he was going to own this and he's going to have to in the next year. But I guess my question is, we haven't seen any attempts at comprehensive reform in a decade since we had that Gang of Eight back in 2013. And to read through some of those names now is kind of funny. It's Lindsey Graham and Chuck Schumer and Bob Menendez and Marco Rubio. But I guess, Carine, we'll see the Republican debate in 2 days, and we'll hear all about those border issues, like the things that you said about the terrorist watch list and drugs coming over the border and child smugglers. We'll hear about that on the stage. But I haven't at least heard who are the leaders on Capitol Hill right now that are stepping up and saying we need to put something together. Do those people exist?
I've heard of I've read different drafts, but nothing that really caught on. Or that there have been folks there were 2 congresswomen from Texas, I believe. I don't follow a ton of the raw policy side, but I've read some drafts of things that have been proposed. Asa Hutchinson talks about a state-based solution. It's something that all the candidates really bring up and talk about, but nobody is emerging as a big champion of this issue right now. And I think it just goes to show how politically tricky it is. But I think that if somebody could come forward with a really great plan that addresses DACA, that addresses all the people present right now, that has some type of compromise on, securing an amnesty, some type of balance there, they could really, be a breakout star. It's just a hard line to toe. And right now that line doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I think that's what's so frustrating from all of our perspectives watching from afar, is that because it's so difficult and intransient, like, the best solution politically is just blame the party in charge right now. Like, it was easy for the Democrats to blame Trump. It's now going to be easy for the Republicans to blame Biden, and no one actually comes forward with a solution, which is, I imagine, for someone that covers it like you, just incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and it definitely is, because it's such a problem right now. But I think that there is a glimmer of hope in all of the misery across parties and all of the disapproval. I mean, President Biden has, last time I checked, it was like a 34% approval on his immigration policy. Hopefully that means that there is a big group of people who are ready to come to the table and sit down and figure this out. So that's my long shot hope from all the misery.
Well, we certainly appreciate like a little optimism and hope. Do you, like, I guess in the near term, obviously there's, as you said, there's mounting political pressure that's coming. What are your predictions for the coming months, really?
Numbers are still going up. They're nearing record levels again. So that is just in the context of the primaries going on. That's going to be a really big topic. And I think inevitably whoever is the nominee is going to have to be able to articulate exactly how they're going to undo this mess or address it. And it's just difficult to really get into the granular on that because of, like I said, there are some lawyers who have no idea how widespread this, all the different measures that have been used are, and who's using what and what that's going to mean going forward. But I think that if somebody can step forward with a real vision and talk about and create, some straightforward talking points on what the problem is now and how we're going to fix it and how that can toe the line again between, being practical and being welcoming to the people here, but also securing the border, then that will help them really stand out. Especially in the Republican primary, I think, Trump wasn't great on immigration either. So it would be great to see one of the challengers really step up and present a plan that, was better than his and certainly better than the one now.
Obviously, immigration is always sort of on the minds of politicians as they talk, but I'm wondering in your reporting how you feel the sort of like where it is falling in terms of like the issues that voters are concerned about. Obviously, we're seeing some sort of unprecedented levels that, as you guys have both mentioned, are stressing different cities beyond the southern border that hadn't really felt it before. Is that going to sort of put a new onus on politicians that hadn't been there in the past, or do you feel like it's still economy and kind of everything else?
I think it's definitely going to be it's always a big issue. It's always one of the top 5, top 3 issues. And I think it will certainly be a top 3 issue in this election. Just because so many, you're going to get your southwestern states who always largely vote on this issue or heavily consider it. But now you're going to have a lot of, New Yorkers thinking about it, Bostonians, people in Chicago, people in DC. This is really spreading far and wide. So I think it will be more of a decisive issue than it's been in the past. Yeah.
I hope so, because I think Ricky was kind of driving at this. Unless you have it from the electorate, then politicians just aren't going to talk about it, and they're not going to try to solve it. Because if people are all saying like what's dominating, it's the economy and inflation and Ukraine and scandals, right? That's what politicians are going to talk about, because that's what the electorate's telling them they care about. So I hope we get what you're saying is happening. I think that would be great, like systemically for us. All right, Carine, thank you so much, Carine, for joining us. If people wanted to follow you, where could they do that?
Oh, I'm on Twitter, and that's basically it. I have a low profile. I'm not active on Twitter either, but now and then you can get a tidbit.
All right, but you can go and look up her stories on either if you subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, or you can subscribe now to the Boston Globe, or you can. Yeah, I will say I'll put in. I think all of her articles on immigration, I think, are worth reading for the depth and the depth of knowledge and like the compassion with which you cover the stories. But a particular plug for I forget what the title. I don't want to missay it. It was like New Immigrants, Same Church. Was a really beautiful article about the church that you go to in New York that I would highly recommend to people if they can only pick one. I thought that was a really beautiful article.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, we will certainly be keeping an eye on this topic, and we appreciate you joining us. I think your perspective and really expertise on this was fascinating. It's going to leave Ricky and I with a lot to think about and talk about. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. This is great.
Yeah, thanks.
Wow, that was impressive, and really just a whirlwind of information. You can tell, I feel like we plugged Carine as an expert, and then as within like 2 minutes, I was like, oh my goodness, she's maybe even more of an expert than I had realized. And a tribute to her career is, like I said, still young, but to be such an expert on a topic that is so complex and so critical right now is really impressive. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye out, and we certainly encourage all our listeners to keep an eye out for her reporting on this, because clearly it's worth reading. But I feel like it just gave us, it taught me a lot, that conversation, and also gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo the fact only a handful of years out of college and like quite a bit of real impactful experience. It was, where do you want to start about some of the things that she talked about? Because there's a lot in there to unpack.
So the thing that stood out for me is how serious of a problem this is, because I feel like we talk about this a lot in a political and policy perspective from like a kind of a high level, like, oh, immigration. Oh, it's like I had said it in the interview with her is like, oh, it's an election year. It's back in the news, right? The one party that's out of power is going to be criticizing the party that is in power for like not fixing this. But then when you listen to her talk about the tens and hundreds of thousands of real people that are struggling in these states, and then how these cities and states are straining at their seams, money wise, shelter wise, healthcare wise, education wise, and like in ways, Ricky, that are unseen to many people. It affects all of us, right? I think it was maybe easy for people in the more northern cities to say like this isn't really our problem, and to say, I think she did a beautiful job saying like, look, it's really nice that people all over the country want to help migrants, understanding that they come from very difficult situations in a lot of cases. But that's just not sound policy. And what we're seeing is like this lack of coherent policy at a national level strain cities and states to breaking points all over the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is immigration is certainly one of those issues that like couldn't be more necessary for the federal government to handle then, and like literally
this is what they're there for, right? Like we've had what this is now, I'm going a little rant here, but like what the Republicans in the House have been saying is like Congress doesn't really do anything. Like we have this impending shutdown, and Bob Good from Virginia was like, I think that's a good thing because Congress doesn't really help anything anyway. And it's like, all right, I mean, I generally understand that we need smaller government, but like one of the critical things that you are supposed to do, that you have like plenary power over, is immigration, and you guys just haven't done anything about it for like several generations since the 1964 Immigration Act.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of the issue, and I totally agree with what she's saying in terms of, the number one priority has to be to sort of secure the border. I think to a degree that is less tenable or less attainable than people are than we sort of talk about, right? Like we had the Trump idea of like, let's build this ginormous wall. He got about 50 miles of it done, but it's like absurdly expensive and has not really been that effective. And we know about tunnels and we know about ladders, and we understand that our border is porous for reasons beyond just that, like, oh, when Democrats are in power, they don't care as much about securing the southern border. And there could be something to like the non-heavy handedness, but I think just in general, it's a taller task than people realize to do it in the way that we have wanted to. And so that's why something like this idea of like the temporary work permits is an interesting one to me. I'm a little disheartened that it's relegated to only a certain population, but in general, I think like this is, when I think about the immigration problem, I don't think about the problem being that people want to be here and that people are somehow getting in here. I think about the problem being that people are getting in here, some through legal means and some through illegal means, but the vast majority through illegal means, because the legal means are so convoluted, you can't understand what they're asking. Even if you do, that your chances of getting selected are so small that, to me, that's the bigger problem that we're not dealing with, because we have a workforce problem. Like we have labor shortages all over the place, and we're not having kids the same way that we were 50 years ago. So the only way to deal with that is a net influx in migration. And we're not talking about that as a solution. I think there are, things to be said for how do we do it safely? How do we make sure that it's not drug cartels and sex traffickers and, whatever else? I think the vast majority, that's not like who's coming in. And if we have more avenues for people who want to come in here and, like she said, be productive members of society to do so legally, then the ones who are doing so illegally will have an easier time to identify them right off the bat. It's like you're crossing the river for a reason, and not because you feel like it's your only option, because all these other options either don't make sense or like are are basically impossible. Like we have a lot of ways of holding people in Mexico, making it like very difficult to claim asylum. We do a lot of things to prevent people from migrating here right now. And I think the idea that someone could come in and figure out a way to like make a better fence or something to really stem the tide of immigration, I just don't know that that's possible.
Yeah. So I think a few things there. One, that this is requires both short-term and long-term solutions, because like we're dealing, so some of the things that you're talking about are like this comprehensive reform, which I agree with, and those are like years-long solutions where really what we, in my opinion, one of the things we mainly need to do is be investing in these countries where these people are coming from. Like how do we figure out ways to invest in El Salvador and Honduras and Nicaragua and Haiti, and how do we get relations with Cuba or Venezuela in places where we don't have tens of thousands of people coming to our border every single day because they can't live and work safely in their countries. And so like that, but that's a solution that's going to take years if it happens at all. It's a solution like that. But the problem is that we have people right now. We have thousands of people right now in Boston and thousands of people right now in New York. And so we also have to have solutions for those things. And so like the temporary work permits, I know Carine wasn't like thrilled with that, because as she and I talked about it, right, it just feels like, oh, we're patching something there and we're patching something here. And like that doesn't make any sense comprehensively, but it's also like, you got to do something, right? Like I think Massachusetts is spending something like $45 million a month right now on migrants, and New York has spent $2 billion in the last year on, like, that's insane. We're us, like taxpayers, are paying these people to stay in shelters and they can't work because of this bottleneck, and the system is just overwhelmed. And that's, again, this is both a legislative and an executive branch failure. But the fact that like we can't process the people at the border, we can't process work applications, and so we're in this like terrible cycle.
Yeah, I mean that little insight, which I think is potentially like, or rings the light bulb, is obvious, but something that I wouldn't necessarily think about that she brought up is that, like, we just can't even process the amount of applications. And also people are submitting like 5 applications because they don't know which one's going to go through and work. And they're, probably filling them out different ways, different times. I'm sure like there's certainly a lot of just transactional issues that we have here. But I still think.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here because I just want to provide some numbers from one of Carine's articles about that. So during last year, 2022, there were about 700,000 migrants that were released through like humanitarian parole. I mean, that's a staggering number. And what people have said is that it takes them roughly 5 months to be able to apply for an employment authorization document, even after they've been granted like this humanitarian parole. And it's on average a year before they might even get like a hearing on their humanitarian parole. So what we're saying is exactly what you just said, and the strain that Carine was talking about was that we have people waiting around, 700,000 people that are waiting around up to an average of a year, many of whom, perhaps most of whom, want to work actually and cannot do so. Sorry, keep it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I think that the obvious solution that people think of is, well, we have to stop the people from coming here. But I think that that's easier said than done. But what is easier is figuring out ways to get them into the workforce, because we know a lot of jobs that are typically employ new immigrants, like restaurant work or construction or things like that we have labor shortages in a lot of those areas, and we could use the help. And so now it just feels like, okay, we're just like sort of shooting ourselves in the foot here, because we have one situation that's horrible, an influx of cities with people who are basically now dependent on the government through not necessarily a choice of their own. Like, they're coming here to work, to live the American dream. And instead they're like, well, you can't work because you don't have status. And so I feel like you guys both hit the nail on the head, that it has to be some kind of comprehensive reform. I worry that the easy thing to focus on is just the number of people that are arriving. And I think you certainly can talk about, well, if you give certain number of people work permits, that just makes more people want to come here. And it's like, well, they weren't getting the work permits before and they were still showing up. So I'm not really certain that all of a sudden our, 1 million a year is going to turn to 5 million. I think that the other stats that I think about, and I hit you with a pop quiz you did not respond to, is that where do you think we rank in terms of population density? We're the third most populous country on planet Earth, but where do you think we rank in terms of population density?
Like out of the 200 countries that exist?
Yeah.
Quite low. I will say 150th.
Yeah, I don't actually even know because they didn't get down that far. We're 37 or so people per square kilometer. And obviously we have cities like New York City, Boston, whatever, far more densely populated than the average United States. And I'm not suggesting that we should aspire to, Hong Kong levels or Singapore levels of population density. But the thing is, we have space, we have people who are interested in working, and our median age, like census after census, is increasing, which means we need more people at the bottom to pay the Social Security for the people at the top who are living longer and longer. And this is whether we want to agree with the math or not, this is an issue that we have that immigration is actually, oddly enough, uniquely suited to deal with if we are willing to say, okay, we need to come up with a solution that actually lets more people in. We just have to be able to deal with them better once they get here.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I actually just did a quick Google because you asked me a question that you didn't have the answer to, apparently. So we're 148th. So great guess by me. But to your point, that's exactly what you said. I think the problem is that 83% of the United States lives in cities right now. And so that's where those people are going, understandably so, because that's where most Americans are going. And so even though we have a lot of physical space, in actuality, that's not really what's happening.
Yeah, no, certainly. But we have space to, each state has urban areas that are more or less very differently densely populated, like New York City versus Louisville, Kentucky. And many of these places could benefit from building up additional infrastructure. Like once people are there, they don't just take, they also provide, and any, money that they make, they in turn are spending in the community. And I think the problem is it goes back to beyond what you guys started talking about, but really where you ended up, which is that this is the favorite punching bag of both sides of the political sort of spectrum. And so there's almost a disincentive to solving it because it's a very unique thing that we have every 4 years that we can, just by the way, you didn't fix this problem and it's all your fault now.
Yeah, no, yeah. As she said, President Biden, he's going to have to own this. I think she said that correctly because he said that he was going to.
But everyone does, right? Every single president does, and no one's ever owned it.
Yeah, but I think this is what I was trying to get at is what's been frustrating to me is that there doesn't even seem to be any impetus to solve it, right? That's where I was trying to get at. Are we hearing this on the Republican stump speeches? Because I'm not. She seemed a little bit better, and she's clearly more informed than I am. So maybe it is out there a little bit more than I'm seeing it. But I haven't been hearing it and seeing it from what I'm reading and watching amongst the Republican candidates. And on the other side, I don't see any Democrat leaders stepping up and providing plans either. And I do think I want to go back. I joked about this, but that Gang of Eight 10 years ago. This is Ricky, where we joke sometimes that we have rose-colored glasses every episode, but this was 10 years ago, and we had 8 senators, 4 Democrats: Michael Bennet from Colorado ran for president, Dick Durbin from Illinois, Bob Menendez, just indicted, from New Jersey, and Chuck Schumer, now the leader of the majority leader in the Senate from New York. And then the 4 Republicans were Jeff Flake from Arizona, who retired, and John McCain from Arizona, who obviously passed, Rubio from Florida, and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. But that passed the Senate, Ricky, 68-32. That it was comprehensive in immigration reform. And would it have solved all these problems? No, but would it have made it better? I feel almost unquestionably, because we haven't updated our system in 50 years. And it just feels, and I think Carine kind of said this, she was just it feels intractable today. And that's another problem where not only can we blame the other people, but this is such a difficult thing. It's like I said, another like terrible cycle where because it's so hard, no one really wants to own it and dig in on it. But then that just makes it even worse. And so what's far easier, just be like, well, it's his fault.
Yeah, I mean, and so I mean, you mentioned the numbers on what it passed the Senate at, but like what happened in the House?
Wasn't even taken up.
Right. So, and we know, I mean, and partially we know why, right? Because it was a Republican run House, and giving Obama a victory on immigration was an absolute non-starter in 2013.
Sure.
And that's like, yeah, this is the most proverbial, oh wow, I can't say that today, but you know what I'm trying to say, of political footballs like there is, because of how effective it is in terms of getting people like riled up, but not riled up enough in terms of like action. It's more just like anger and disappointment.
Yeah. So I one question for you, and I kind of got this. I was asked Carine this too. Was this idea was floated that like, hey, Jersey, maybe you can take on some of these migrants, and Republicans were obviously against this, but Democrats came out and were en masse against this too. And I just want to read you a quote from, it was in Atlantic County, and the Democratic chair there said, quote, "I don't know what the Republicans were expecting, but I think they were caught flat-footed when the Democrats took a similar position that they have." And so like, and like that was like, oh well, you think you don't want migrants here? Well, we don't want them either. Yeah. But he went on to say, he was like, I think our position, and like the reporter pressed him on, they're like, well, that like you're just claiming that you're the same as Republicans. Like, is that's the winning message? And the reporter's like, well, we don't. The county chair was like, well, we don't have the xenophobia that they do. And I was like, well, this is the height, to me, the height of irony. But I'm curious your perspective, because I certainly am like, have been like, see, this is where all of you people that said that like Trump was this monster because of his immigration policies, and all these Republicans were bigots and xenophobes. All of a sudden, now it's not in my backyard.
I mean, this is case in point. The biggest problem with Democrats, just in general, is that whenever the problem comes to their doorstep, they don't actually are not no longer interested in how to solve it. I think it's very disappointing. But you see it all across the country, and issues of immigration certainly, but like what to do about homelessness and or houselessness or whatever. Like it's always, yeah, but not here, because I've made my very nice little community here, and my schools are good here, and it's safe here. So, but like, I think you should do something about it. And obviously, part of me, like, they're like, as much as like it's kind of laughable to say, yeah, we definitely don't want them here, but we're not racist about it. Like, is wild. But maybe like in some ways they're like, not openly. Oh, yeah, maybe I'm just gonna leave that there. But like, yeah, it's disappointing. I understand and this is for politicians, has always been the sentiment. It's like, we don't know how to deal with this problem. Like, even if we wanted to, we just don't know what the answer is. And all I can think about as a politician is somehow it's going to go wrong and bite me in the ass. And so it's way better. Like, I have enough problems that I don't know how to solve. I'm not going to add this one. And that is disappointing, especially for people who want to profess to believe the things that they believe on immigration. Yeah, it's
Right. It reminds me a little bit of when President Biden was giving Vice President Harris like her portfolio at the beginning of their time together, and immigration was one of the things on it, and everyone's like, "Whoa, what? Don't be giving that to me!" and like all, she didn't say that obviously, but like all the people, like the unnamed sources, like her advisors, were like, this is a losing issue. Like, we wish that he hadn't put it in her portfolio, but that's probably why he did it. He didn't want to own it either, you know. Which is, when you have the leadership at the top, both of them were playing hot potato with it. That's not great. But I will say one thing that Carine said is that this is an opportunity for Republican candidates there, and there are not many opportunities. But you can hang on Trump two things: one, that the immigration policies that he did have in place were not particularly humanitarian, and two, immigration got worse under his tenure. Like he spent all this money, and the problem not only wasn't solved, but actually made worse. And so you would think for people trying to break out, my girl Nikki, or some of these people that are down, like Asa, for example, like why are they not making this an issue? And I mean, who knows? It's not too late to do so, but that I would like to see someone try to do that.
Well, I mean, I think the problem though is for both Democrats and Republicans, they like the solutions, quote unquote, because I don't think any of them are the actual solutions, are none of them are palatable to each other's like base. Like no Republican can go forth and be like, all right, well, we need to deal with a lot of people that are here now. And the idea that we're just going to send in like these DEA doom squads to like round people up and ship them off is ridiculous.
DeSantis talked about like he was going to like send like bomb people in that.
Yeah, no. I mean, you have multiple Republican candidates saying that, and it's like that clearly doesn't make any sense. But that's what's going to get the cheers at their rallies. Not like I think maybe like some kind of a balanced approach where like we give some. Yeah, no, that's not interesting. And this is yet again where we get stuck in American politics, because like a lot of the like exactly what Carine was saying, like the practical solutions that we need to be talking about, I think are just going to be so hard to talk about because people aren't interested in them. Yeah. They're not like the political winners. And so in many ways, like I'd almost like rather not have a huge presidential focus on this and be something that Congress can somehow quietly do after the election.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a pipe dream.
I know. It's like that's why I was asking Carine. I was like, "Can you give me some leader? Give me one. Like I don't care what party they're in, what branch they're in. Just give me somebody that's going to try to own this issue." I don't know. I do like that she was hopeful at the end. I was like, my kind of girl there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some ways, like she was pointing to like this is different than it has been, right. And like that could be something that pushes people in a way that they hadn't been pushed before. Because I mean, in my own small little bubble, it's not something that I had ever, thought that Massachusetts would be declaring a state of emergency about.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, that maybe is like legitimate hope there. And
fingers crossed.
I can't tell if this is like the presidential election year is a good time or a bad time for this to be happening, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, we shall see.
All right. Thank you to Carine for joining us again. Would certainly encourage everyone to go check out her work. It's brilliantly reported and beautifully written, and keep an eye out on her in the next few months and years, because she certainly seems to be an expert in an area where we need more of that.
Yeah, just objectively, her writing is great. Very easy to read and does an incredible job just telling these like important stories that just have to be told.
So as always, we feel tremendously lucky that people like Carine give us their time, and we hope everyone enjoyed. Thank you as always for listening.
Till next time.
See you, buddy.
What I wouldn't give for the hope I used to find in a case of lion's head. Folks of different minds, because even though it did not share the pains we share, that American ideal, friends made over arguments in an early morning buzz. Need an early morning buzz.